right?
All right.
Now, 1, 2.
Mavil, it's up to you.
Good morning, everyone. For those that are following us from the other side of the ocean, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here with this fantastic group of scholars to talk a little bit about structural change, right, and macrodynamics with a special emphasis on climate change. I truly believe that climate change is the greatest challenge, one of the greatest challenges, I would say the greatest challenge of our generation. So I was very happy to be part of this initiative, of this effort. And in the next 3 days, we'll be discussing these topics related to structural change with special emphasis on climate change. So I'm very happy to be part of this initiative. And without further ado, Professor José Oreiro, let's proceed with our introductions.
Okay, many thanks. Good morning for our Brazilian and South American, Latin American guests. Good afternoon for our European guests. Well, let me do my introduction. Dear Professor Roberto Ellery, Head of Department of Economics of the University of Brasilia, dear Professor José Luis Panhussat, President of the Regional Council of Economics of the Federal District, dear Professor Kessia Kamenat, President of the Regional Council of Economics of the State of Goiás, today represented by Professor Adriana Pereira de Souza of the State University of Goiás, who have just arrived at the conference. Dear Madame Letite Dufay, Director for Brazil and Southcon of the French Development Agency, dear guests and researchers from Brazil, Latin America, the United States, and Western European countries. As leader of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group, I want to give to all of you the welcome to the second international workshop of the research group, whose central theme this year is the new green developmentalist structural change and policies for the ecological transition. Climate change is a scientifically proven fact, but not yet treated with due urgency by governments of developed countries and especially by the governments of developing countries. I believe that the fundamental reason for developing countries to have little interest in the issue of climate change is because a false dilemma has been established between environment preservation and economic development. In this way, developing countries understand that they cannot be called into sacrifice the increased quality of life of their citizens because of environmental mistakes made in the past by developed countries. The fundamental premise of this workshop is that there is no dilemma between economic development and the fight against climate change. On the contrary, developing countries can and should enter the new industrial revolution provided by the need to decarbonize the economy, which will require significant investments in the transition to a low-carbon economy. These investments will be intensive in knowledge and the use of labor and can therefore be compatible with the goals of reducing CO2 emissions with the generation of income and employment. This is a great opportunity for the Brazilian economy. After 4 decades of semi-stagnation to a process of premature deindustrialization, Brazil will be able to reindustrialize its economy and, with this, resume economic development, generating high-quality jobs and greater equity in income distribution through the necessary investments for what Professor Giulio Guerini and I call the ecological structural change. For this cooperation between the state and private initiative will be absolutely necessary. Liberalism and Soviet socialism are outdated ideas. We need a social market economy in which the state and the private sector go hand in hand together to achieve a better future for Brazil and for all humanity. The resumption of economic development in an ecological, sustainable way is the best gift we can offer to Brazil on the commemoration of the 200 years anniversary of its independence. Thank you very much and welcome you all. Professor Roberto?
Good morning or good afternoon or wherever you are. Good something. Welcome you all to the Department of Economics and to the School of Economics and Business Administration at the University of Brasilia. We are very happy to have this meeting at this very important time in our history. We're coming back to full activity this week. I mean, this is the first week after 2 years on Zoom and Teams and Google Meet and stuff like that. We're face-to-face with our students, with our faculty members. So it's very important. We're very happy here at the University of Brasilia with this opportunity to be back. And this is a very important discussion. This department has a long tradition of caring about environmental discussions. We have some professors working with this topic since the 70s or the 80s. The 70s most are retired right now, but this is being a topic of discussion in this department. And we also have a good number of professors thinking and researching in macroeconomics and structuralist macroeconomics, as Professor Oreiro. So it's time to those teams of professors meet each other and try to work together these questions, because they are really matter. We're talking about something very important. Brazil has a role. I hope he's not disappointed the world. Right now, things are not so good, but I mean, doesn't matter who is in charge. Brazil has a role in this whole discussion. We have the Amazon forest. We have the Cerrado here in Brazil. It's very important too. So I welcome you all, and I wish you have the best meeting. Enjoy the meeting. I hope sometimes very soon you all be here at the university so you can face each other and meeting and go to take a coffee and stuff like that. Until then, I hope you have the very useful time. To end, I would like to thank Professor José Oreiro to organize this, to set up this meeting, and all his work at our university. He's a very important member of our faculty. So Professor Oreiro, very thanks in the name of the department, and I'm pretty sure in the name of the School of Business and Economics. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. Now the word is with Professor José Luiz Panhussati.
Obrigado, professor Oreiro. Vou falar em português, né? Temos muitos alunos assistindo, então, só para registrar, né, a alegria da participação do Conselho Regional de Economia nesse segundo workshop internacional do grupo de pesquisa sobre macroeconomia estruturalista do desenvolvimento, em especial para discutir esse tema, que é um tema importante, né, sobre mudança estrutural e transição ecológica das economias. Nesse contexto de pandemia, acho que isso se acentua, se acelera, né, e se torna mais importante, né, ter um debate qualificado como esse, né. Acho que o Conselho Regional de Economia tem uma tradição de participar de grandes eventos internacionais. Nós organizamos, por exemplo, em 1989 ainda, com um grande evento internacional sobre desenvolvimento econômico. Depois, em 86, quando eu estava na presidência do Conselho Federal de Economia, conseguimos trazer grandes economistas desenvolvimentistas, pós-keynesianos, então o Conselho sempre está aberto a participar, e se sintam à vontade de explorar o Conselho no que for possível. A gente vai ajudar sempre nesse esforço do debate, né, especialmente do debate sobre desenvolvimento. Eu queria, mais uma vez, né, deixar o Conselho à disposição do grupo e todos os interessados em debater temas que são importantes, né, para o desenvolvimento econômico. Já realizamos também alguns eventos interessantes, que fica aí a sugestão, né, para trazer para as universidades brasileiras temas específicos, né? Por exemplo, nós, em parceria com a CEPAL, ainda quando eu era presidente do Conselho Federal de Economia, organizamos um workshop em que reunimos um grande número de professores, né, preocupados com o tema, né, da macroeconomia estruturalista, né, e, claro, disponibilizamos para as universidades um grande número de referências bibliográficas e análises atualizadas sobre o assunto, né, e que organizamos em parceria com a IPEA também um grupo, né, preocupado com esse tema, né, que se manteve por bastante tempo. Na época, o IPEA, né, estava interessado em apoiar as universidades no debate sobre desenvolvimento. Muito obrigado, professor Oreiro, por essa inclusão do Conselho Regional de Economia, do Conselho Federal de Economia. Infelizmente, o professor Lacerda não pôde estar presente, né, por estar com problemas de voz, né? Então, parabéns aí pela iniciativa e obrigado pela gentileza.
Many thanks, Professor José Panho-Satz. Now, Professor Adriana Pereira de Souza, representing the Regional Council of Economics of the State of Goiás. Please, the word is yours, 2 minutes.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to the second international workshop in the Green Development, Structural Change and Policies for an Ecological Transitions. And the discussions to build the development here are extremely important for future development plans. We know that our countries must promote social, economic, and also environmental development. We also know that the challenge, especially when it comes to productive development, involves impasse between economic and environment development. In recent decades, there has been much discussion about the relationship between the economy and the environment development. There is a certain consensus that a condition to development is sustained over time. There's need to be interaction between environmental preservation and less predatory production. Studies show that it's possible to seek sustainable development through that is called green development, but the participation of the whole society is necessary, especially to sectors to have the capacity to provide to boost investment society for the construction of a new no-aggressive model that includes the environment in process of integration and sustainable development. Some examples and complements such as the Green ICMS, the creation of funds that aim to support environment development and preservation with social inclusion, development public and private institutions, and the incentive for development and implementation of very important environment policies so that an environmentally sustainable, socially fair, and economically viable development. The Brazil has a relevant role in this process due to its natural characteristics and this position in a space environmentally rich and economically in development. We need to harness, improve in direct this potential to promote an economy that respects the limits of the environment by integration these levels of development. In this context, the Regional Economic Council of the State of Goiás, chaired by economist Kersia Preda Gamenash, whom I represent here, is contributing with studies debates, and actions to promote this development. I thank Professor José Luis Loureiro and everyone participating in this event that will present a rich and broad debate on green development and the ecological transition, with the participation of so many competent professionals involved in the promotion of a better world. A good day to all and good works. Thanks.
Many thanks, Professor Adriana. We have just entered in the room the director of the Faculty of Economics, Management, Accounting, and Public Policies, Professor José Márcio Carvalho. Please, Professor José Márcio Carvalho, the word is yours. Please, just 2 minutes because we are a little out of time.
Okay, sorry about that. It was my fault, problem with technology here. I apologize, sir. Please forgive me. It's an immense pleasure to be part of this opening session. José Luis Loureiro is adding a very important event for our faculty, is leading the process of internationalization in our faculty, building connections with many researchers in Brazil and outside Brazil, a very relevant agenda for us. And what can I say about this event is a very good timing to discuss this question now. It's an extremely important question for us in Brazil. And I'm sure that the debate will, with such a high profile guest here, that we can get some light on this theme. Thank you very much again for inviting me to be part of this event, sir. And I really apologize for my fault. It was a technology problem. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Congratulations for this bright initiative in our faculty.
Okay, many thanks, Mr. Director. And now closing the speeches, Madame Lefebvre for l'Agence Française du Développement. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dear Professor Carvalho, dear Professor Loureiro, dear and distinguished researchers, colleagues and guests, it's a great pleasure and it's a great honor as well to be with you this morning to launch this second international workshop of Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group. I would like to extend my special thanks to Mr. Loureiro and to the University of Brasilia for the invitation to participate in the debate. Let me introduce in a few words the French Agency for Development and its support to green development. AFD is a public institution who works to implement France's policies of development and international solidarity. Our actions include international financing for the public sector and NGOs, publication of research, training on sustainable development, and also awareness raising in France itself. We work on the basis of the French law on solidarity development and the fight against global inequality. This law seeks to fully integrate French development policy into the multilateral framework, and we try to be fully compliant with the SDGs and to contribute as much as possible in all international development banks initiatives, such as International Development in Finance Club and Finance in Common Initiative. What are AFD goals and what are the targets in concerning green development? We wish to work with all our partners against the root causes of crisis and help guiding the most vulnerable countries toward more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable growth models. The will of a country to develop and grow is inevitable, normal, and cannot be discussed. At least, it cannot be discussed by international institutions such as AFD. We have no lesson to give to anyone. Each country must find its own way to eradicate poverty, preserve environment and climate, and support good governance and prosperity. But what AFD can do and what it must do is to support countries who wish so to develop in a sustainable way and to turn sustainability into an asset instead of a constraint. It's not easy, but it is possible, and we are fully convinced that joining our efforts is the best way to secure a sustainable future. That's why our ambition in attending this workshop is first to benefit from the analysis, research, and reflection of a great number of distinguished participants. Second, to contribute to the debates within the mandate which has been given to us and with the tools we have been provided with. And third, to foster a collective response to collective challenges. Once again, I thank you for the invitation, congratulate you for this great and necessary initiative, and wish you all a fruitful workshop. And of course, congratulations to Brazil for the anniversary of its independence. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Madame Lefin. Then please, Daniel, play the video of the Brazilian independence and the Brazilian independence anthem, please.
Felizmente estamos chegando, Alteza. Já estamos na colina do Ipiranga.
Da parte da princesa Dona Leopoldina e do senhor ministro José Bonifácio.
De Portugal nada mais temos a esperar, senão escravidão e horrores. Decida-se, Vossa Alteza, o quanto antes, porque em resoluções e medidas de água morna para nada mais servem. Cada momento perdido é uma desgraça. Só há dois caminhos a seguir: partir para Portugal e entregar-se prisioneiro das cortes, ou ficar no Brasil e proclamar a independência. Mande mensageiro para São Paulo, que estropie tantos cavalos quantos forem necessários, mas que entregue o mais rapidamente possível estas mensagens ao príncipe regente. Todos em forma!
Sai! Canalhas! Parasitas! Cachorros! O que aqueles imbecis estão pensando? Eles querem e terão a sua conta. Em forma! As cortes de Portugal querem nos escravizar. De hoje em diante, as nossas relações estão cortadas. Eu nada mais quero do governo de Lisboa. Nenhum laço nos une mais. Pelo meu sangue, pela minha honra e pelo meu Deus, juro promover a independência do Brasil. Independência ou morte! Independência ou morte!
Well, with the playing of the Brazilian independence anthem, we have just finished the section of opening section of this Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group. And now we will start with the conference of my friend, Professor José Antonio Campo. And let me just introduce him. Please, I just went to go to my notes in order to present to Professor Ocampo. Professor Ocampo, good morning, and thanks for accepting our invitation to participate on our workshop. Where I am. Let me see. I have it from. Where? Oh, okay, it's here. Google. Now, keynote speakers. Well, Professor José Antonio Campo is Professor of Professional Practice in International and Public Affairs, Columbia University, United States. He served in a number of positions in the United Nations and the government of Colombia, most notably as United Nations Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin American and Caribbean, the CEPAL, Minister of Finance, Public Credit, Chairman of the Central Bank of Colombia, Director of the Minister of Planning, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, and Executive Director of FEDESarrollo. Professor Ocampo holds a PhD in economics from Yale University, United States. Professor Ocampo has also published extensively on macroeconomic theory and policy, international financial issues, economic and social development, international trade, and Colombian and Latin American economic history. So, Professor Ocampo, you are now introduced. Many thanks for sharing your time with us. It's a great honor for Brazilians and Latin Americans and for the other guests from whatever part of the world. Please, the audience is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Professor and friend José Luis Oreiro, for the invitation to give this inaugural lecture in this workshop, which will deal with issues in which I have been quite active through my professional life and my writings on this, let's say, structurally macroeconomics, which is, of course, something that I have been quite a bit. Let me put the presentation on that I'm going to make. Okay.
Yes, we are seeing.
So I told Professor Oreiro that I will talk about the issue of structural dynamics which is an essential element in the analysis of the macroeconomics of developing countries, and particularly the role of production sector policies. They are generally called industrial policies, but I guess the fact that industrial in Spanish means too much manufacturing, and I'm not talking only about manufacturing, I decided to call them production sector policies. Okay, so let me start with the basic concept that I have been proposing in regard to this issue is what I call a dynamic efficiency. By dynamic efficiency, I basically underscore the fact that successful development is always essentially a process of structural change. So the changes in the production structures is the core of a dynamic growth process. And therefore, the policies and institutions that are built up to promote the process. So the basic rationale is, of course, the conflict between static efficiency and dynamic efficiency. Static efficiency is the concept that we studied extensively in traditional microeconomics, which is basically the issue of resource allocation. But the dynamic efficiency, which is the changes in the structure of production, is a different concept, and sometimes requires that we go above, let's say, the issues of resource allocation in order to, particularly to allocate resources to those sectors that may not be efficient today, but may be the source of change in the economic structure. Now, there are many schools of thought that we can think of that have contributed to this analysis, including actually classical development economics. I mean, people forget now that in classical development economics, the emphasis was on industrialization as the core of economic growth. But also, you can say the neo-Schumpeterian, you can say structuralist and what I like to call neo-structuralist economics, which are the Latin American schools, and evolutionary economics. In all of them, there is an emphasis on the critical role of learning, externalities, and economies of scale as essential for this process of dynamic efficiency. Now, in contrast to that, we see the very disappointing effects that of the development that Latin America has been going through since the market reforms, let's say, of the 1990s. Of course, they came earlier in some countries, particularly in Chile. And now, I mean, the expectation that more open economies will generate dynamic growth has not materialized in Latin America. The growth rate of Latin America from, let's say, 1990 to 2019, just to eliminate the COVID-19 crisis, was 2.7%. And in the era of industrialization, let's say between 1950 and 1980, it had been 5.5%. So we have grown at half the rate that we grew during industrialization. And in the case of Brazil, the contrast is even sharper. Because Brazil, of course, was one of the most dynamic economies during the industrialization period. So let me start with, can you call the stylized facts? And let me summarize them in terms of three types of families of facts. The first one is the persistence of large inequalities in the world. That's economic inequalities, which is what I'm talking about today. So you can say there are few entrants into the top club. So the idea, for example, of orthodox growth analysis that somehow that we will converge with the same technology to the top club, to the same standard of living of the developed countries, that has certainly not materialized. So what we have is actually the old concept of low-income traps, but we also have many cases of middle-income traps, which is actually the pattern of Latin America. And there are other things, which I've called truncated convergence, open divergency, and that, in contrast to the experience of several Asian economies, you can say East Asian particularly, but now you can also probably include India, which have been quite successful in their development process, which is something I call the dual divergence. The fact that, for example, Latin America has been diverging with the developed countries, but also with the Asian countries. And as you know, on top of that, what we have is the development of what you can call the East Asian cluster, which have given a lot of opportunities to new East Asian countries, for example, Vietnam, just to not name just one case, but has left aside, the countries in other parts of the world, including Latin America. Now, what you have to think in the case of Latin America is this phenomenon that in the recent literature has come to call the middle income trap. And what is the source of the middle income trap? Well, the fact that the concentration of research and development in developed countries implies that innovations essentially take place in developed countries, and that there are therefore high entry costs into the technologically dynamic activities. So you can say that also that there are also asymmetry between the firms that lead and the suppliers in the global value chains. There's a lot of emphasis today that global value chains were a good opportunity. Yes, but depends on what part of the value chain you are in and what part of the value chain you capture. And there are many other things, this difference in domestic financial development, volatility in external financing and the terms of trade, which is a phenomenon that deeply affects Latin America. And therefore, there are significant macroeconomic asymmetries of different character, including in the capacity, for example, of central banks to undertake countercyclical policies. It's quite common in the case of Latin America that central banks have to lower interest rate during booms because of the otherwise they will attract even more capital inflows. But when capital goes out, they have to raise interest rate despite the adverse effect on economic activity. So and then on top of that, there are fluctuations in the exchange rates that they generate also a factor of divergence of a different character, basically because it makes highly uncertain the return to new economic activities because of the fluctuations in the exchange rates. Anyway, because of that, the macroeconomics of our countries is quite different from the macroeconomics, let's say, of the US or Western Europe, where central banks can play a very important role. And this is just from a study of the World Bank in the past. The story, you can see here that there is a tendency for countries to keep within a trajectory. So lots of poverty traps or low-income traps, a lot of middle-income traps, where most of Latin American countries are very few, and then high countries are developed and continue to be developed. There are exceptions. Let's say middle-income trap that countries that have gone up to the high-income country like South Korea, you can see here, Hong Kong, Singapore, Spain. And then China, you can say is went from low income to middle income. I will certainly soon join the high income category. The second fact is that the structural change is the essence of economic growth. I teach my students that the traditional growth theories are balloon theories. It's like a balloon that inflates. Somehow homogeneous. That's not how growth takes place. Growth always takes place through structural change, which is basically new economic activities and economic activities that decline. So the structural change is the nature of that. In the terminology of Schumpeter, is creative destruction. So you create, but also destroy economic activities, and of course the economic activities that create must overcome the adverse effects of those that you destroy. So the success of a structural change has been the key to successful economic development. And in that regard, the patterns of specialization matter. So the most countries that have failed to increase market shares are exporters of primary goods and natural resource intensive manufacturers. So those activities typically generate in the world lower growth patterns and incapacity to join the group of innovative activities, which may be in manufacturing or services, but also in some cases in primary goods. There are, of course, countries that have extracted fair growth from natural resources, and you can think of some developed countries, let's say Canada or Australia. But generally, the countries that have joined the high-income group have done so through the development of manufacturers and modern services, and of course, with East Asian regional cluster being the leader in that regard in recent decades. This is from an old study of mine, which I actually try to emphasize the issue that specialization matters, and you can see the either the red or the blue, which compare different periods. You see that the countries that grow fastest are those that are specialized in high-tech manufacturers, followed by mid-tech, where the primary goods or natural resource-based manufacturers are the slowest growing countries. This is from a very well-known paper by Hausmann, Huang, and Rodvik, which show the growth rate based on the specialization pattern, which they estimate, I probably don't have time to explain exactly, but basically the quality of exports, which they define as based on the comparison with high-income countries, the better the quality of exports, the better the growth rate is. And this is the famous product space of Hausmann, in which you have this cluster inside of economic activities, depending on the interaction with other economic activities, which is the industrial cluster. Whereas, for example, this is the textile cluster, the textile and apparel cluster, which is not part of this, and then the others in the lines outside are basically natural resource clusters. So they actually show with this analysis that the development of the East Asian economies have really gone from the periphery into the center. This is actually, I always say this is the best representation of the center-periphery idea of Raúl Prebisch, because this is actually the center are the economic activities that are highly productive. And this is, of course, the correlation between GDP growth and manufacturing export growth, which shows that the economies that have stronger manufacturing growth are those that grow faster. By the way, this is associated, I forgot to include perhaps that graph with the fact that in Latin America, we had a peak of manufacturing share in GDP in the 1970s, depending on the country, in the early 70s or the late 70s. For example, Brazil was the late 70s. But then we have a decline later on. So on average, the share of manufacturing GDP of Latin America today has gone back to the 1950s. So the industrialization process that has taken place, which is now called premature deindustrialization, is a part of the phenomenon that we're talking about here. The third fact is that path dependence is associated with learning processes. So the learning is quite important, and of course the new economic activities have to go through an intensive learning process. Learning in terms of the production, but also trading or the goods. But so learning is always associated with production experience, which means that the comparative advantage can be created. They are not assumed to be like in traditional trade theory, assumed to be determined by the endowments. You actually can create endowments that generate a dynamic economic activity. In turn, in contrast to that, when you lose a production experience, because, for example, with the industrialization, that has adverse effects on growth, because you stop the learning process associated to those economic activities. Now, in my analysis, the dynamic of production structure that depends on two basic factors, which I call innovations and complementarities. Innovations are new activities or new ways of doing previous activities, which is in the jargon of Schumpeter, the new combinations, and the learning processes associated with the development. That's the core, one of the core issues behind the dynamic economic growth. But also complementarities, which are the linkages, network, the value chains as they are called now, which by which the new economic activities support other economic activities, and the institutions that are developed in order to complement those complementary activities. And there is a third factor, which is elastic factor supplies. I will talk about one in particular, which is financing, and the role of development banks, which must be part of this process. And the combination of these factors, particularly of innovation and complementarities, is what determines the dynamic efficiency, which is the concept, basic concept in my analysis. Now, the first issue is the innovations, and here, going back to Schumpeter, the critical mix between creation and destruction is essential. So, which is the restructuring, or as someone has called it, substitution and complementary effects of innovation. And then you have, as I said, you have Schumpeter's positive creative destruction, in which the creative parts of the exchange overcome the destruction part. But in Latin America, we have many cases of what I have come to call destructive creation. So you develop new activities, but you destroy many others in the process of development. For example, in some cases, the development of new natural resource sectors are associated with the industrialization process. Brazil actually is a very good example of that combination, and that's what I said. It's not creative destruction, but destructive creation, in which the destructive part prevails over the creative part. In the industrial world, the technical change is the engine. In our case, we have to the transfer of sectors and technologies from the industrialized world is of course essential, but no innovation is passive. So even when you buy technology, you have to go through a learning process. So technological transfer has to be embedded in a science and technology policy to first of all to learn, but also to you are very successful to create new technology. So you go from just copying technology to becoming a source of technology. There are very good examples, a very good analysis actually, for example, of the experience of South Korea in that regard, how they went exactly from that, from very from copying technology, let's say, to becoming technological sources of new technology. So climbing the ladder in this hierarchy of technology in the world entails shortening transfer periods and gradually becoming a more active participant in the generation of technology. So the generation of technology has to be the objective, but you have to start by probably copying or buying technology, learning how to use it, and doing secondary innovations that at the end will lead you into a full science and technology system and which you are the creator. And the evolutionary school has developed this concept, which I just mentioned in passing, of what are the attributes of technological change. The first one is incompletely available and perfectly tradable. That's why you have to learn and to sometimes copy or do secondary innovations. Proficiency cannot detach from production experience. So you have to produce in order to be able to do the learning process, and the public-private attributes. No technology can be exclusive of a firm, but it always benefits other firms. Well, that's why you develop, of course, systems to protect innovations, technological innovations, intellectual property rights. But of course, the intellectual property rights, if badly designed, can actually be a block to new technology. The complementarities is the development of networks of suppliers and users of your products, so value chains. And of course, in the development of value chains requires some information, sometimes coordination of activities, and then you have the positive effects, demand and supply effects that generates. And in that process, I think that the particularly important issue is the efficient provision of non-tradable inputs, like knowledge, logistic, and marketing services, specialized financial services, and adequate infrastructure. So those are non-traditional, non-tradable inputs that are crucial in the complementing the innovative activities. And institution building is actually a non-tradable factor. So you have to develop institutions in which you support the innovation process and the linkages of the innovative activities with other activities. And on that basis, I have come to this diagram of mixing learning with complementarities, which you have strong and weak learning, and with strong with complementarities. And I say, well, let's say a deep process is when you have a strong learning with strong complementarities, China, in recent decades. Okay, then you can have a strong learning with weak complementarities. This is what I call the short breath. I think many of in the import substitution period of Latin America, many cases, for example, in my country, Colombia, we had a short breath. So you develop new activities, but which were interestingly have a strong learning process, but then you didn't develop the complementarity. So you started to import most of the goods. For example, you do car manufacturing, but most of the interesting pieces of the car are imported. So you actually don't have much. Then you have the labor absorbing, which is actually not bad, in which you have weak learning with strong complementarities. I always say that coffee in Colombia was that in the past, in the first half of the 20th century. It's a very simple activity from the technological point of view, but you had lots of complementarities associated to that, which were basically the source of economic growth, which that's called labor absorbing. And then you have shallow. For me, the shallow with weak learning and with complementarities is from maquila. Maquila manufacturing for me is a shallow innovation. And this is how I see in my analysis. I will not go through this in detail, but you have basically two relations. You have a technology function in which productivity growth developed by innovation generates strong GDP growth, and then you have the macroeconomic demand equilibrium, which is the GGG, and then you have a equilibrium, let's say, of this sort. There can be multiple equilibriums, and actually this low equilibrium may actually generate a bad pattern of growth. So you may get the trap. You have a low innovations with bad macroeconomic equilibrium. Yeah, and this I see as a process by which innovations come in waves. So you have a first wave, which the TT function goes up, but the second wave it exhausts itself and go back to the old function, let's say. And so you have to have new functions, new innovations, in order to bring it back up. Anyway, in my writings, you see a bit of this analysis, and this is when you have a positive macroeconomic shock, for example, in terms of trade boom for a natural resource economy, and then you have the GG function, the one that moves. But when that ends, it goes back, and you go to the low level equilibrium. Anyway. This leads me to this concept of what I call anchor versus shallow industries, which is basically depending on the complementarities. So when you have new economic activities but with very low local complementarities, then you have actually what I call a shallow innovation. Whereas when you have and actually a shallow innovation has also adverse effects, because if the complementary activities are not dynamic enough, you go back to a situation where the effects of that innovation are relatively weak. And that's why I said, well, you have an anchor innovation when you develop a sector, a new sector, and then around that sector you develop new economic activities, which may be non-tradable, but may also be tradable activities. Okay? Then you have the elastic factor supplies, in which I want to underscore for you the issue of financing. Financing is essential, but also, of course, the training of the new labor force that you require for the innovative activities, and how that is done in part with state support, but also by the development of training within the firms, and therefore the association of the factors. But let me particularly emphasize the issue of national development banks as one critical factor. And of course, you have in Brazil one of the let's say largest national development bank, the BNDES. Although I must say that BNDES has had a mixed history since market reforms, because in some periods it has not been supporting of innovations enough, but rather even of privatizations rather than innovation in some periods. And in any case, in the work that I have done with Stephanie Griffith-Jones and many others, in recent years I have done a lot of analysis of national development banks, also multilateral development banks, by the way, which are also a complementary instrument in this regard. And the basic issue is that private finance may be unwilling to fund activities with uncertain returns, strong learning effects, and externalities. So that is with innovations or complementarities. And therefore, the structural transformation may be weakened by lack of adequate financing. So the basic functions we have come to of the banks are, I emphasize then, first of all, they provide counter-cyclical financing, because during crisis, private finance tends to weaken. So you have to have the banks, the national development banks, do the counter-cyclical function. Second, this is what I have emphasized in my lecture, support activities that lead to structural transformation. Then you can deepen and improve financial markets by developing development-friendly instruments. For example, development of private bond markets associated with and particularly bond markets for the innovative activities. And then support to create the inclusion of small firms and finance global public goods, with climate change being today the priority. And of course, the national developments have to work closely with the private sector, including the private financial sector. Commodity specialization, which generates problems. I have emphasized in my presentation problems of a structural character or capacity to innovate, let's say, and develop, but macroeconomic vulnerability associated with terms of trade fluctuations. We have now a positive one, but you may have, we have also negative ones, and how to manage those fluctuations. And the fact that in our countries, that is associated also with the boom-bust cycles in international finance, and therefore when you have a crisis, you have both a trade crisis and a financial crisis. So how to do counter-cyclical management in that regard becomes more critical. And then the political economy problems with strength-seeking, which has been associated with also with that. But then there are opportunities that you could not disregard in this, and in which some countries, notably Brazil, have been actually quite successful. So you can have innovative activities associated with natural resources, and then of course our links with China are particularly important because, our trade with China cannot be what I call a 19th century pattern. In which we basically export commodities and import manufacturers, which is what we did in the 19th century with Europe and the US. We have to develop also a more diversified export structure vis-a-vis China. Anyway, there are opportunities for natural resources, technological and biotechnology, nanotechnology, and very importantly, environmentally friendly products, which is a wave which we'll see increasingly important. Well, it's becoming increasingly important. Then you have customized products, which are also an opportunity, and of course the high Asian demand. So in my analysis, you cannot forget about natural resources, except that your production sector policy have to promote innovations in natural resources, but also manufacturing, let's say the reindustrialization process, and of course the modern technological services, which are quite important. Exchange rates are critical in this regard, and basically because of the integration with the global economy. And for me, the basic problem is when you have a instability of the exchange rates, which is a critical problem of several Latin American countries. So you have a period in which you have, for example, terms of trade boom with capital inflows, and then exchange rate appreciate, and then you have the opposite, which is exchange rate depreciate. The basic problem with that, in my view, is that it generates unstable incentives for the new economic activities, and therefore how to guarantee a stable and competitive exchange rate is particularly, of course, you can say, read Bresser Pereira in Brazil, which has been quite extensively on this topic. So based on that, let me summarize what are the policy implications of my analysis. So the first one is that a structural transformation has to be a basic objective of economic policies. That requires, of course, high quality infrastructure and education system. That's what I call background conditions. But you have to, in particular, support the structural transformation. So support new industries and production clusters, diversification of the export base, which of course will be also hopefully affected by supported by the new industries and production clusters. And very importantly, do domestic linkages, so do complementarities around the innovative activities, and don't, they say, don't do maquila, because maquila is my shallow process of structural transformation. And then the innovation systems, so let's say science and technology has to, you have to develop science and technology systems that support the innovation processes. And then, of course, by the way, in this regard, the investment in science and technology is a crucial issue, and Latin America is far behind in that regard. I mean, let's say a typical OECD country, has a spending on science and technology around 2.5% of GDP. The only Latin American country that had more than 1%, which is Brazil, has more or less half the level of an OECD country. And other countries, on average, for example, my country only invests 0.3%, which is 1/8 of an OECD country. So you have to put also a well-financed science and technology system as part of that. And of course, remember that structural change is not a once and for all process. It's a smooth process in which you have to promote creation, but also manage the activity that fall behind the destructive part, and how to manage that process. It has to be a basic element of that policy. That is associated with the export strategies, in which you have to look at how to transform your export strategies. In that regard, looking for new opportunities, and of course, what are the opportunities that are given to our countries by the global system are crucial. And let me say in that regard, this graph, which is a bit interesting. This is my periodization of the growth of world trade after the Second World War. And you can see here that the two periods of high dynamics of international trade, 1950 to 1974 and 1986 to 2007. These are periods in which let's say the world economy provided quite significant opportunities. Let's say we in fact we're relatively good in the 1960s in diversifying our export base, based on the fact that the developed countries started to import increasing amount of manufacture from developing countries. But that, of course, stopped, and they have this second wave, which is the wave, let's say, of value change. Latin America has participated in that process, for example, Mexico, much more than the others, but this has been basically the East Asian boom. But look at that, since the 2007-2008 financial crisis, which is generally called global financial crisis, with other authors I call North Atlantic, because it was a crisis of the US and Western Europe. But what is dramatic is the slowdown of trade growth that took place since 2007-2019. It was the slowest growth of the post-war period. And of course, now we are even lower with the COVID-19 crisis. So a big question mark in this regard about your export strategies is what are your opportunities? And in my view, as I point here, regional integration in Latin America has to be a priority, particularly you have very low international trade growth. And then has to be accompanied by macroeconomic and financial policies. So you have to have countercyclical macroeconomic policy, which is a challenge given the procyclical effects that particularly that terms of trade and boom-bust cycle in international finance generate for us. So how to design good macroeconomic policies, that was not the subject of my lecture, but that's a topic which I have done also quite active. So you have to have commodity stabilization funds, and very importantly, an active exchange rate policy to compete, to guarantee the competitive and relative stable real rates for the new economic activities. Taxing sector that do not generate learning externalities is a complementary instrument, which is again in the Brazilian debate has been quite emphasized by Bresser Pereira. But on top of that, finally, but not least important, is the national development banks. So active national development banks. So you can say it's macro, plus financing, with macro, the exchange rate issue being particularly crucial, but also developing countercyclical macroeconomic frameworks, which is a big challenge for us, for our economies. And then, of course, in financing national development banks that, of course, work closely with the private sector bank. Okay, thank you. I guess I did overextend myself a bit, but thank you again, Jose Luis, for this invitation.
Many thanks, Professor Ocampo. Before answering questions from the audience, I want to make just a few observations. I think that your theoretical background is based on the integration of innovation and complementarities. Okay, well, Brazil until the end of the 70s had precisely that. We are capable to make a very successful import substitution strategy, advancing in many industrial sectors. First, the final goods production, then the intermediate goods production, and finally, capital goods production. We have a very interconnected manufacturing sectors with a lot of forward and backward linkages, and so on and so forth. So until the end of the 70s, Brazil had an industrial manufacturing output that was higher than the sum of the manufacturing output of China, India, and South Korea. So if we had this event in 1979, I think that the successful case will be Brazil, not China. But then something goes wrong, not only with Brazil, mainly with Brazil, but for all promises of Latin American economies. Of course, that Argentina is a unsolved problem since the beginning of the 20th century. But something went wrong. Bresser Pereira and I, we had the idea that the problem is that in the 90s, Brazil beginning to adopt the policies of the Washington Consensus. So we open our capital accounts, we lower import tariffs, we made privatizations, we reduce the public investment in science and technology and education and so on and so forth. Well, and in the last governments, there is a completely disaster in terms of science and technology policies, and also of the role of the BNDES, of the National Development Bank. So I would like to hear from you. What is your interpretation for the Brazilian and Latin American failure compared to Asian success? It's my particular question. Now I will open for the audience. I don't know if Marvil wants to do a question. No? Jesus Ferreiro, Carlo Di Politi, Giulio Guarini. Well, I think that people shine. So please, Jose Antonio, make the...
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's quite clear that the most successful structural transformation of Latin America during what some have come to be called the state-led industrialization period was Brazil, by far. Mexico actually was also a very high growth economy, but not as equally. And in countries like mine, Colombia, we didn't deepen enough, let's say, into new sectors as Brazil did. Although there was also, again, more or less a failed, successful industrialization period. But certainly what happened with market reforms is that those processes were turned down, and we entered into premature industrialization. That's what has been the pattern of most Latin American countries. It's even shocking, I must say. It's even shocking that even Mexico, despite its free trade agreement with the U.S., in which is a large exporter of manufacturers, Mexico is also a country where the share of manufacturing in GDP has fallen. It's striking. And I think the problem with Mexico may be more with the, well, it has some activities that, let's say, car manufacturing in particular, that is highly integrated and you can say relatively successful, but others in which is just maquila. And maquila is not, in my view, is what I call a shallow transformation, structural transformation. So
okay.
I totally agree with you, and your work, of course, has been quite extensive on this issue, as well as I mentioned, Bresser Pereira.
Okay, we have a question from Luis Fernando de Paula, professor of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He asks, how to connect structural change with climate change in a developing strategy for Latin America? Can be climate change at the heart of a development strategy or even a window of opportunity?
Oh, yes, certainly. Certainly. I guess I went in passing, but in the functions of national development banks, actually, I mentioned that. But you can also say innovations, because many innovations today are actually associated with the fight against climate change. And you can also say, by the way, in countries like Brazil or my country, Colombia, the issue of biodiversity being also a very important environmental issue. And there may be opportunities associated with exploiting our biodiversity. But certainly climate change is crucial. As well as this issue I mentioned in passing also, which is environmentally friendly goods and services, which is part of the innovations in which you are involved in this era of fighting climate change. And of course, the role of national development banks in that regard is crucial, as well as the complementary support of multilateral development banks, which are also involved in this issue, or you can say, probably under financing the new activities enough. And there has been, for example, recently quite a big fight. Even the U.S. accusing the World Bank that is not doing enough in financing the fight against climate change.
All right. There is another question from Valeria. Adding to the question made by Luis Fernando, what role can regional integration play in such process of structural change? Can you please explain, I believe?
Well, first of all, regional integration has to be promoted quite extensively, particularly in this very uncertain world of international trade, which has become even worse with both the COVID-19 crisis and now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The uncertainties around world trade have increased substantially. So the real integration, trade integration, it can play a very productive role. But I think going forward, we have to be much more active in trying to promote new areas of integration. And for me, for example, the two I think are quite important, which is science and technology. I mean, when you look at the European Union, I mean, one of the most interesting things is how they have common, elements, common science and technology projects of different character. Some of you may have participated. I have participated in European projects, which are taking place in several countries. So why not try to link our science and technology system in a deeper way, and to enjoy many areas, innovations in many areas. And one in particular, which I think is quite crucial today, is health. So how to we not only do more cooperation among our health systems, but also research in relation to health, which may be quite important. And you could probably say climate change may be an opportunity also to think of doing joint activities on science and technology systems that promote it.
Okay, I remember that some months ago, I read a Twitter from Denny Hodrick, in which, for my surprise, he told that reindustrialization is impossible. Well, I'm surprised because Denny Hodrick writes extensively on the role of the manufacturing industry for rapid growth, and then he retreats. No country has ever reindustrialized, which I think is a little exaggeration, because when I saw the German data, there is a reindustrialization during the period of 1995 to 2005, the same for Sweden, and I believe for Norway or Denmark. But we know that the high-tech activities, as the manufacturing industry and the high-tech services, are the sources of increasing returns. So when a country became to backwards, it will the difficulty to catch up will be increasing over time. So my question is it time for Brazil? Is there enough time for Brazil? Is it possible for Brazil or Latin America to reindustrialize and catch up, or we are doomed to the middle income or the poverty trap?
No, the middle income trap. I think he's asking for us to keep in the middle income trap. No, I think there's an opportunity to reindustrialize, and for me, an active innovation policy can actually be part of the story. I mean, you mentioned even developed countries, which have been reindustrialized in some periods. But premature deindustrialization, which is our problem, is certainly something that can be reversed. And I think we have to think about, first of all, what that implies for our innovation system, what that implies for our national development banks, and what that implies, again, for our regional integration process. Because I think regional integration can be a significant source of reindustrialization for Latin America. And perhaps, and not least, we have to rethink our relations with China. Let's put it this way, China becoming not only a buyer of our primary goods, but also a supporting of our reindustrialization.
Okay, so just one last question. I remember that in the 80s, Your Majesty, the King of Spain, Juan Carlos I, saw that Spain can have a special role in the integration of Latin America with Europe. Unfortunately, nowadays, my country yards in Spain thought they are 100% Europeans, and that they forgot their old empire. But do you think that is possible, an integration between Latin America and Europe, mediated by Spain and Portugal?
That's a good question. I have not thought enough about that. Maybe you you can say much more about that. But let me say that one case that is quite clear in that analysis is the story of the Spanish multinationals that invested heavily in Latin America. Which is very interesting. And one hypothesis, which I think is quite correct today, is that they invested in our countries in order to become bigger, larger, and then becoming that way more important in the European context. So they use us as in the transition to becoming larger. But they now are more interested in investing in Europe than investing in Latin America. And it's quite clear that the Spanish foreign direct investment in the 1990s was with the leaders in Latin America, but now they are declining in importance. So maybe that's a negative answer to your expectation that somehow they could become much more effective. But maybe there are some ways of, of integrating, particularly with the Spanish, but some Portuguese also, but particularly with the Spanish firms, in order to for them to be stronger partners again of Latin American development.
Okay, Professor, I worry that our time is out. Once again, many thanks for your participation and your lecture at this workshop. As associate editor of the Paolo Silus Labini Quarterly Review, I invited you to write a paper based on your presentation today, your lecture, for a special issue of the journal, if it is possible. There is no deadline yet, but I think that the ideas that you presented today will be very interesting for both Europeans and Latin American economists thinks in terms of economic development. So many thanks for your participation. And now I will declare closed.
Let me say thanks to you again for, I'm sorry that I made my informality in dressing, but I'm actually on vacation.
No problem. Take a good vacation.
Very nice for
I'm in the old Spanish school, so we have to be very well suited to the occasions, but it's just mine. No problem at all. So I declare it closed, the first section of this international workshop, and now we'll begin the ordinary sections. Bye-bye to everyone. Bye, José Antonio. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Bevo loito antes de vir o rumo levou no maré baixo sombra, barcos negros sulcan a mañá sen voz, as redes baleiras en gaivotas, e dirán, contarán mentiras para ofrecerllas ao patrón, quererán pechar cunhas moedas quizais os teus ollos abertos sobre o mar, quererán pechar cunhas moedas quizais os teus ollos abertos sobre o mar. Madrugada o porto despertou o amor, o reloxo do bar quedou varado na costeira muda da desolación, non imos esquecer nin perdoalo. Volverei, volverei á vida cando rompa a luz nos cons, porque nos arrancamos todo orgullo do mar, non nos afundiremos nunca máis, que na túa memoria xa non hai volta atrás, non nos humillaredes nunca máis.